Good evening, and thank you for joining me for our midweek Bible study on the book of Isaiah. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is that we are not live like we usually are. This is pre-recorded because this Wednesday is my son's birthday. So he with a very sad puppy dog eyes, asked me if I was going to be having to do a Bible study on the night of his birthday. And so I assured him that no, I would pre-record it and do it ahead of time so that way I wouldn't miss out on any of the festivities. So unfortunately, there will be no live back and forth during this Bible study, but as I'm going through this, or as you're watching this, whenever, if you have any comments, questions, whatever, just go ahead and put them in if there's a live chat box with the video. It wouldn't be live, but the comments, leave a comment with your question or whatever it might have. And that way I'll be able to address it either directly with you. I can email you or shoot you a text, or we'll address it in next week's Bible study. So either way, whatever works for you. But I apologize for not being live, but, gotta do what you gotta do, right? So tonight we are we'll be doing chapters 13 and 14 of Isaiah. And as I mentioned at the end of last week, is that this begins a section that, beginning with chapter 13, is actually 10 chapters worth of oracles announcing judgment on the nations that are surrounding Judah, and then one oracle actually against Jerusalem. So until, this will take us through chapter 23. So pretty lengthy section here. And these oracles or prophecies are really they're oracles of judgment. And the fun thing is that Martin Luther translated the word oracles as burdens, which is actually the same way that the King James Version translates the Hebrew word there. And that is because the Hebrew word for oracles used here is also used in other places in the Old Testament to refer to something being carried. So, a burden that you are carrying. And that translation actually fits in really well with the theme of these oracles, in that, these are judgment. These are harsh words of law, and prophecies of destruction and devastation. And so for the prophet, this is a pretty significant burden to bear. As a pastor, as a preacher, when I'm preaching really heavy law, when I'm really, the text for the day really brings it hard. It's a burden. It's difficult to have to bear this, strong word of judgment, that's supposed to, the intention of the law is to strike us dead. When the preaching of the law is supposed to get us to the point where we say, wow, I can't do that. It's impossible for me. How? I just can't. Lord, have mercy on me. And that's where it's supposed to get us. But again, it's just we don't want to hear it. We don't want to say it. It's hard stuff. So truly this section of oracles is certainly a burden, with all these harsh proclamations of punishment that are coming upon the nations and the people. So the ongoing theme that we're going to have with this is that the enemies of God and the enemies of God's people are going to be destroyed, that they will be judged, they will be dealt with. And the purpose for this, and because you think about it, these are oracles against the nations. However, Isaiah is proclaiming them to the people of Judah. It's not like Isaiah is going into Babylon and proclaiming against them. It's not like Isaiah is going to these places and sharing these oracles against these nations. No, he's actually sharing these oracles to the people of God, which you would think, well, to what purpose? Okay. But this is to assure the people that God is in control, that God is bringing judgment against their enemies, that, especially at this time, as Judah is feeling, the enemies encroaching, that they're fearful, they're afraid, they're not sure where their help is going to come from. And so this is God saying, I am your help. I am your salvation. I am bringing judgment to all these nations. So for the people, this serves as a reminder that he is in charge, and he will bring his justice, and it will be final and complete. So that is where we're going. So let's bring up... There we go. All right. Isaiah 13. So let's just jump right into it then. All right. First section, first 5 verses. The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw. On a bare hill raise a signal. Cry aloud to them. Wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. Oh, jeez. Sorry. The sound of a tumult is on the mountains as of a great multitude, the sound of an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host for battle. They come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens, the Lord and the weapons of his indignation, to destroy the whole land. So, this is an oracle against Babylon. Now, the fun thing is that during Isaiah's time, while Isaiah is writing this, he's alive, Babylon was not the world power that it would be. Babylon was, it's just, they weren't, it was like, Babylon? Why who cares about Babylon? It wouldn't be for another century or so that Babylon would rise to be the power that it was. At that time that Isaiah is writing this, Assyria is the big one. Assyria is the one who is going to be invading Judah and surrounding them and attacking them, and the aggressor, essentially. And so, this is definitely, obviously looking ahead. So it's prophesying that at some point Babylon, which is currently in Isaiah's time not a threat, they will be judged. Okay, and he pictures this judgment as a great war, a great battle. And God is saying, I'm going to raise up like my armies to lay waste to Babylon. Now, at this point, he doesn't say who this army is. We'll get to that later. But the coming judgment here, excuse me. Wow. There we go. So as we go through this, and this goes throughout all of the oracles, and we've mentioned this in the past sessions, is that when Isaiah is prophesying about things to come, what we're going to see here, especially when he's talking about judgment, we're going to see it operating on 2 levels. We're going to see it operating in terms of him calling upon judgment on Babylon that is to come shortly, like within the next 100 years or so, or 200 years rather. But he's also talking about the final judgment. So the judgment that God is bringing to Babylon is functioning in a very practical way to bring judgment to the current enemies of God's people, but is also meant to foreshadow, to look ahead to the final judgment when all the enemies of God will be judged. When the judgment is brought to completion. So prophetically, these 2 things are always held together, where we're talking about what is to come, what is going to be fulfilled in our time, and what is going to be fulfilled at the end of time. So when Isaiah talks about the coming of the Messiah, he's not just talking about Christ's first advent, his incarnation, as a baby in Bethlehem, but he's also talking about his second coming, the final day. So it's these 2 things at once. So judgment for Babylon, you're also going to be hearing, and the way he speaks is going to sound very much like what you would hear in something like Revelation. Very, very similar. And especially when we're dealing with Babylon, Babylon becomes kind of shorthand for all the enemies of God and his people. So if you go to Book of Revelation, there's talking about Babylon and Babylon and Babylon. Well, that's what John is using is the historical great enemy to represent the future, present great enemy, like as Satan and then the enemies of God and the whatever. So that's what we got going on. So again, you've got this 2 things kind of happening at once. So it's not wrong that you read it and you say, wow, this sounds like it's talking about the last day. It's like, yeah, exactly. But he's also talking about a current judgment that is coming to actual Babylon. Okay, so you're right on target if that's what you're hearing here. Oops. Okay, let's try not to blast through these. There we go. Okay, so verses 6 through 13. There we go. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. As destruction from the Almighty it will come. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another. Their faces will be aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation, and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant, and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place at the wrath of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his fierce anger. Heavy stuff. So again, if you reread those verses 6 through 13, it would, as easily as it's talking about Babylon, you could just as easily see this being pulled from the book of Revelation and talking about the final judgment. And what we have here is actually in, let's go back here. Jesus will quote, we'll paraphrase Isaiah 13, verse 10 here, in Matthew 24, verses 29 through 30. Where Jesus says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So again, Isaiah is talking about the judgment on Babylon, and then Jesus takes this and quotes it in reference to the last day when he comes back. Okay, so you see these both of these things being held together, kind of in attention, but also parallel, and all this good stuff. So yeah, it's just kind of more of the same. Just wrath of God is coming and judgment for sin, and we've already talked about how. We're not always comfortable talking about the wrath of God, and that it's kind of like, why, it just doesn't sound right. And yet, when we're talking about sin, it sounds exactly right. God cannot tolerate sin. Sin has no place with God. And if God is a just God, he has to punish sin. So there's just no other way around it. The only other thing really to point out here would be the verse 12, the gold of Ophir. Ophir was just a region that was well known to have fine gold and many riches. So, yeah, it's pretty much as simple as that. So, no big deal. All right, moving ahead, verses 14 through 16. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, and each will flee to his own land. Whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Okay, so, again, violent, harsh, terrible imagery here. And of course, he's talking about war. He's describing God's judgment in using the metaphor or the image of a great war, a great battle. And so this is the kind of stuff that happened. The reality is that when war comes, it is horrific. It is terrible. Ask anybody who's fought in a war. It's not pleasant. It's not fun. And so, this is just kind of the stark reality of what it was. And the problem is we read this, and what is our, especially that infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes, their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. We react to that with shock and horror, and immediately what we think is, how can a loving God say this? How can this be the thing that he's bringing to people, even in punishment? I mean, punishment is one thing, sure, but verse 16, what the heck is going on there? I mean, that seems to be going beyond punishment. I mean, that just, how do you rationalize that? How can you defend that coming from God? And, to answer that, to deal with that, you have to look at what is the perspective and what's going on here. And so again, when in dealing with Babylon, so as an oracle to Babylon, or against them rather, how is God going to bring this judgment to them? What is he going to do? Is he going to cast down a pillar of fire like, before? Is he going to turn them all into salt, like Sodom and Lot's wife? How is he going to bring this judgment? Well, he's going to bring the judgment through the means of other nations. He's going to bring other nations in, because he's always said that there's a nation that's going to come and be the tool of God's judgment. And so that's what he's going to do. He's going to use these other nations to do it. Well, how did the nations invade and conquer back then? This is how they did it. So, in one, when we're reading this, this is not necessarily in any way an endorsement that this is like, this is what pleases God, that infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes, that houses plundered and wives ravished. This is pleasing to God in any way, shape, or form. I mean, all you have to do to discount that would be to read Scripture and see that God does not desire the death of sinners. He doesn't desire any of this. However, when God will use sinful people to accomplish his aims, those sinful people are going to do sinful things. Okay? I mean, good Lord, look, go back through the Judges. That's a wonderful trip through God sending flawed human beings to try to direct his people, and those flawed human beings doing flawed human being things. And God is still accomplishing his will. He's still getting his stuff done. But the people that he's called to do these are just, they just get worse and worse and worse. So this isn't God saying this is a good thing. He's saying this is what's going to happen. Okay, and when I allow this foreign nation to come and be the instrument of my judgment, this is what they will do, because this is what they are. And also you kind of get a feel for this, when we say this is shocking. Well, the judgment that God brings here, you think about what Scripture says, in the manner you judge, so you will be judged. Well, if we're horrified by this, by what this nation is going to do to Babylon, we should probably take a look in our own heart and be horrified by that. Because, what? This is how mankind treats one another, viciously. I mean, that's what we've been hearing about of judgment throughout Isaiah so far, is how horrible human beings are to other human beings, and just how utterly lost in sin they are. So, if anything, this is a reflection of our own sinful hearts. And so, if you want to look at it, that God is allowing us to be judged in the way that we judge others. It's like we're horrified by this, and yet we're not horrified by the sins that we commit every day, every moment even. We think our sins are no big deal, but this is like, oh, it's like, well, no, our sins are, just as grievous to God. So then, so that's how we understand this. This isn't God saying like, ooh, haha, I love this. Absolutely not. I mean, all of this, all the oracles of judgment, the fact that he has to send this judgment does not make him happy. It is not God's pleasure to judge and to condemn. He has to because of what we have done. We've brought sin into the world, and he has to deal with it. And he would rather not, but this is what has to happen. So this isn't some kind of God condoning this sort of thing at all. And then when you push this forward to the final judgment, again, it's not. We read this in terms of being a metaphor for this total and complete judgment, that the final judgment, that those of us who are condemned because of unbelief on the last day. I mean, it's horrifying, the consequences. Okay, and so this should be scary. This should be worrisome, because the result of not believing is this. This is the judgment that you bring upon yourself. So I mean, there's a visceral reaction to this, and that's kind of the point. So, yeah. All right, moving along, verses 17 through 22. Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them. Here's who's going to bring it against Babylon, the Medes, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. Okay, so the force that is going to come in and judge Babylon are the Medes, and these are basically ancient Iranians, kind of in northern Iran, I believe is where they were located. So yeah, and it's fun during Isaiah's time, the Medes were actually Babylon's ally against Assyria. See, Assyria was the superpower, so Babylon was, like, oh, we got to protect ourselves against them. Well, the Medes and the Babylonians were allies. And so it's kind of, for the people of Isaiah's time to hear that, it would have been like, wait, what? Wow, okay, so the Medes are going to turn against Babylon. Oh, okay. And that's what's going to happen. So Babylon just utterly destroyed. And this is the picture that he gives us, is this absolute devastation, that there's just not going to be nothing left. And a kind of little anecdotal story about that is that Alexander the Great wanted to rebuild Babylon. That was going to be a major project. And he had 10,000 workers who worked for 2 months to clear away the foundations of a temple in Babylon. Just one temple. Had 10,000 guys working for 2 months to clear it all away. That was how messed up things were there. And, the city was not rebuilt. Alexander the Great did not accomplish his goal there. So it was truly devastating. I mean, it was destroyed utterly. So what God is saying here, I mean, it's serious stuff. So that's why it's like this idea of total and complete final judgment kind of stuff. Ooh, okay. Oh, well, we cross over in Isaiah 14, but we're still in the same oracle here. So the first 2 verses. There we go. For the Lord will have compassion on Jacob, and will again choose Israel, and will set them in their own land. And sojourners will join them, and will attach themselves to the house of Jacob. And the peoples will take them, and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel will possess them in the Lord's land, as male and female slaves. They will take captive those who were their captors, and rule over those who oppressed them. All right, so Luther actually has a comment on these verses here. And he writes this. He says, everything aims at the consolation of the godly. In no affliction can there be enough comfort for the human heart, because the works of God are great and we are weak. And so the prophet lifts up, by means of admonitory threats against our enemies, and by means of promises and examples, lest we fall into despair. Okay, so basically what Luther is saying here is that God gives these oracles and these reminders of all this stuff as a means to secure us some hope. Okay? So the punishments that God is proclaiming, they come as a result from sin. Okay? The comfort comes because of God's promises. So God gives these promises as a reminder that we have hope. Okay? So, all these oracles of judgment against other nations, did God really have to tell people any of that? I mean, when you look at it, it's like, okay, so he's going to destroy Babylon at some point in the future. Okay. Why bother telling the people of Judah that? It's like, wouldn't it make more sense to tell Babylon? to warn them, repent, like Nineveh with Jonah. No, I mean, he tells the people of Israel, the people of Judah, rather, these things. Well, why? I mean, he already gave them the promise back in Adam and Eve. He promised that her seed would crush a serpent. There. God gave the promise that I will save my people. I will send them salvation. Okay. Couldn't they just keep going back to that and have that be a reminder? But God gives repeated promises of comfort and peace, just like he says here, for the Lord will have compassion. He brings back in his comfort. So even in the middle of all these oracles of judgment, which are terrifying and horrifying, he keeps reminding them of his promises. But, yes, I'm bringing judgment. Yes, it's going to be a terrible day. But I have made a promise to my people. I will keep my promises to my people. And that's the same thing he does to us today. He wraps up his grace in the word and the sacraments, and we receive it every week, all the time. Kind of this ongoing reminding us, I have promised you this. I have promised to be with you, and here I am. I've promised to forgive you, and here, my words forgiving you. I've promised to cover you and cleanse you. Here's baptism. He gives us all these things, so this is very on brand for God. And so we see this interspersing of the gospel coming in to remind us of the hope and promise we have. And again, why he tells us the oracles against the nations is to remind us that God is the one in charge. He is going to take care of things. Okay. So that's the idea there behind it all. All right. We've got a long section here, and not that much to say about it, actually, so we'll just read through it. When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and the hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased, the insolent fury ceased. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of rulers, that struck the peoples in wrath with unceasing blows, that ruled the nations in anger and with unrelenting persecution. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. The cypresses rejoice at you, the cedars of Lebanon saying, since you were laid low, no woodcutter comes up against us. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you. All who are leaders of the earth it raises from their thrones, all who are kings of the nations. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out away from your grave like a loathed branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers nevermore be named. You will not be joined with them in burial because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of every... Oh, I think I repeated that. Anyway, prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. I will rise up against them, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will cut them off from Babylon, name and remnant, descendants and posterity, declares the Lord. And I will make it a possession of the hedgehog and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord of hosts. Wow. Okay. So basically, this is all a taunt that on that day you will taunt the king of Babylon. So this is just this very involved taunting of the king of Babylon, basically saying like, look, you said you were so awesome, you were going to do so many things, you were going to ascend, and look at you now, you are destroyed, you are laid low, you've lost everything. And certainly not just for the king of Babylon, but for the entire empire. And like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's just, read through it. It is what it is. But I would say read through that, and see how well this not only applies to how they would taunt the king of Babylon, but think of this in terms of taunting Satan at Christ's death and resurrection. Again, this prophetic duality where he is talking about Babylon, but really we're going to see it made full and complete in Jesus Christ. So this taunting, this look at you now, is very much and very easily applied to Satan and all the enemies of God. So and not just so you can apply it to Satan at the cross, but also you can apply it to all the enemies of God on the last day. So there's always layers when you're dealing with prophecy. All right, 24 through 27. The Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains trample him underfoot, and his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from their shoulder. This is the purpose that is purposed concerning the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has purposed, and who will annul it? His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back? Okay, go back. All right, so now we kind of do a little footnote here, where we pivot from Babylon to Assyria. So he has a little bit of an oracle against Assyria tacked on at the end here. The big question is why? Why that? Well, during Isaiah's time, like I said, Assyria was the problem. Assyria was the aggressor. Very, very aggressive towards Judah. They would often, invade and attack. And but what's going to happen is that the people of Judah would witness Assyria's defeat in a great way. In fact, Isaiah 37 tells us about one of Assyria's major defeat at the hands of God. So Isaiah 37, beginning with verse 33. Therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return, and he shall not come into the city, Jerusalem, declares the Lord. For I will defend the city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people rose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh, utterly defeated. So in one night, 185,000 soldiers were struck dead. And so this is what God is telling the people. He's saying this is what's going to happen. And the point of this, why does he bring this in? Why does he tack on something against Assyria when he's talking about Babylon? Well, because Assyria is the present threat. Babylon is no concern at the time of Isaiah. Assyria is. So God is saying, look, I'm going to bring defeat to Assyria. Okay, you're going to see this. You're going to see what I'm going to do to Assyria. And so once you see what I do to them, then you will know that is what I'm going to do to Babylon. You can trust that I will handle this. I will fulfill my promise to you. So you will see this happen. And so in seeing that, you will know that I will be bringing judgment to Babylon, to all of the enemies of me and my people. So nice little tag on the end there. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. So then, these last 4 or 5 verses then in the book, chapter 14, a very small oracle concerning the Philistines, Philistia. So verse 28, so a new oracle, second oracle. In the year that King Ahaz died came this oracle. Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken. For from the serpent's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying fiery serpent. And the firstborn of the poor will graze, and the needy lie down in safety. But I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant it will slay. Wail, O gate, cry out, O city. Melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you. For smoke comes out of the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. What will one answer the messengers of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge. Okay, let's go back. There we go. So this is the only oracle in this section, in these 10-chapter section, that there's a date given. Okay, so in the year that King Ahaz died is when this oracle came about. So kind of what's going on here is that Isaiah prophesied that Assyria would be destroyed. 14 years after Ahaz died, that is when Assyria invades Jerusalem and 185 soldiers are struck dead. So that's 14 years after this oracle. And so when that happens, when God defeats Assyria there, basically the Philistines would rejoice, and they're going to, over the defeat of Assyria, because they were afraid of them too. They were enemies of Assyria. So they would rejoice in Assyria's defeat. But this is God saying, like, whoa, hold on. What are you so happy about? You should not be rejoicing that I've struck down that the rod that struck you is broken, meaning Assyria. Because you got to remember that the Philistines were a constant enemy of God and his people. Philistia was a little coastal strip of land southwest of Jerusalem, comprised of 5 main cities, which was Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Okay, so they were always antagonistic towards Israel, always enemies. You think back, Samson. Big, strong Samson, he fought the Philistines. The whole conflict was between them. Goliath, David and Goliath. Goliath was the champion of the Philistines. So the Philistines were, geographically, right on top of Israel. So they were neighbors, and they were always aggressive, very antagonistic. They worshipped, obviously, pagan gods. You got Dagon, Ashtoreth, Beelzebub. These were some of the gods they worshipped. And, of course, you see that pagan worship and of those gods that seeped into Israel and the people of God a lot. So they were not only aggressive towards Israel, but also a very, very poor influence, negative influence on them. So this is, in the wake of Assyria's defeat, God reminding the other enemies of the people that judgment is coming for you too. Okay, and it's a very brief one, oracle that is. But the fun thing for us is at the end here, where what will one answer the messenger of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge. So again, this is a reminder that though your enemies are surrounding you, and especially talking about the Philistines, who are literally right there. I mean, Assyria had to come a ways to invade. The Philistines were right next door. So though you are surrounded by Assyria and the Philistines, and your enemies are all around you, God is saying, my people will find comfort. My people will find refuge. I will bring it to them. The Lord has founded Zion, and in her people will find refuge. Now, we're not talking about Zion as a geographic city. It's not a place. We're talking about Zion as the place where God's grace is found, the place where refuge in God is found, which is in, we would say in the church, in the fellowship of believers, in those who trust and rely on God. That is where our refuge is found. Though our enemies surround us, though horrible things happen to us, our refuge and comfort and peace is always found in God, in his word, in his grace, in his mercy, in his forgiveness through his son, Jesus Christ. So this is all again, the purpose of sharing these oracles with the people of God is to remind them that God is in charge. He's in control. He will have, vengeance is God's. He will bring judgment. He will deal with this all. Do not be afraid. Do not be anxious. Just trust in God. Believe and know that He will handle this, and that you will find peace and refuge in Him. That's what it's all about. So, there you go. Isaiah chapters 13 and 14. Wow, and it's only about 40 minutes, so there you go. Well, we went through it a little bit faster because obviously there was no questions for me to answer, and I didn't go on too many tangents, I don't think. But again, if there's any part of this that you have questions about, thoughts, whatever, please let me know. Either drop a comment in on this video or email me or whatever. But I'd be happy to address them either one-on-one or next week when we join back together live for our Wednesday night Bible study. But yeah, difficult stuff to go through with these oracles. Again, yeah, it's harsh, it's violent, it's terrible stuff. But you got to remember, this is what we reap in unbelief. I mean, when we've turned our backs against God, this is the judgment. I mean, it's harsh, but it's no more harsh than the sin that's in our hearts. The way we treat others, the way we treat ourselves. I mean, this kind of shock and violence and terror and whatnot. This is what we bring to the table. So it shouldn't be shocking at all to us. It's just, we are sinners. Thanks be to God. He forgives us and sends Jesus Christ to us. So, amen to that. All right. Well, thank you very much for bearing with me tonight, and I apologize that it wasn't a live Bible study, but I appreciate you understanding and allowing Aiden to have daddy time on his birthday. So I appreciate it, and I look forward to joining back with you next week live. So until then, peace be with you.